There are things a father does that his children only understand later. Not later that year. Not later that decade. Later when they are standing somewhere, at a podium, at a bedside, at a window looking out at a life they have built, and something small happens, a familiar sound or a smell or a particular quality of late afternoon light, and the understanding arrives all at once, fully formed, with the weight of years behind it. This is the story of one of those moments, and it happened on a Tuesday afternoon in May 2024 on the set of Family Feud in front of 200 people and a row of cameras, when a young woman named Dr. Amara Osei broke down at the winner's podium, not because she had lost something but because she had finally understood, completely and all the way down, what her father had given her. Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for 15 years. He had witnessed generosity and sacrifice and love in every form the show could produce. He had been moved many times. But there is moved, and then there is what happened to Steve Harvey on that Tuesday afternoon, when a 58-year-old man named Joseph Osei, who had worked 3 jobs for 14 years so his daughter could become a doctor, stood in the audience of a game show and cried with the specific, quiet dignity of a man who had not allowed himself to cry for 14 years because he had been too busy working. This is Joseph's story as much as Amara's. More, perhaps, because Joseph Osei did the thing that most people only talk about. He did not dream about sacrifice. He did not describe it. He did not use it as currency in conversations about what he deserved. He just worked. 3 jobs. 14 years. Every single day. And the day his daughter walked onto that stage with Dr. Amara Osei on her name card, he sat in the audience and watched, and said nothing, and felt everything. Steve Harvey saw his face, and that was when everything changed. Joseph Kwame Osei was born in Kumasi, Ghana in 1966. He was the second of 4 children born to a schoolteacher father and a market trader mother who sold cloth and dried goods from a stall she had operated since before Joseph was born and would operate until 2 years before her death. His parents had between them precisely the combination of qualities that produce a certain kind of person. His father gave him a belief in education as the most reliable path through the world, and his mother gave him a belief in work as the most reliable path through anything that education could not reach. He had been a good student. Not a spectacular student, not the kind of student teachers remembered 30 years later and mentioned in speeches, but a thorough one, methodical, the kind who made sure he understood a thing completely before moving past it. He had an engineer's mind. He liked problems that had definite solutions. He liked knowing how systems worked. He liked the particular satisfaction of something functioning correctly because all its parts were in the right place doing the right thing. He had come to the United States in 1989, at 23, on a student visa to study mechanical engineering at a state university in Ohio. He had worked, part-time, whatever was available, within the rules of his visa, from the moment he arrived. He had sent money home when he could. He had finished his degree in 4.5 years, taking more credits each semester than was strictly required, because the faster he finished, the sooner he could work full-time. He had met Eleanor, Ellie, at a church in Columbus in 1993. She was 27 to his 27, a quiet, precise woman who had grown up in Cincinnati and who worked as a hospital administrator, and who had, in the first 10 minutes of their conversation at a church picnic, demonstrated such a clear, organized understanding of how systems worked and how people moved through them that Joseph had thought, "This woman thinks the way I think." That was the whole of it. That was enough. They had married in 1995. Amara was born in 1997. Her brother Kofi was born in 2000. Joseph had worked as a mechanical engineer for a manufacturing company in Columbus. It was solid work. Not glamorous, not spectacular, but solid. The kind of work that a man who appreciated systems functioning correctly could find deep satisfaction in. He was good at it. He was promoted twice in 6 years. Then, in 2003, the plant restructured. Joseph's position was eliminated. He was 37 years old with a wife, a 6-year-old daughter, a 3-year-old son, a mortgage, and the particular experience of a man who had built something carefully and watched it come apart through no fault of his own. He took 3 weeks to grieve this privately. He did not burden Ellie with the full weight of it, though she always knew, she had that quality, and she let him have the 3 weeks without pressing. Then he sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad and he made a list. He had his engineering credentials. He had contacts. He had skills that transferred to other industries. He could find another engineering position within a reasonable time frame, likely in this market, doing this work. That was column 1. Column 2 was what he owed. The mortgage, the car, the children's accounts he had been building since before they were born, the money he still sent to Ghana for his mother's care, now that his father had passed and his siblings were managing things and needed help. The full, honest accounting of what a life cost to maintain. He looked at column 1 and column 2 for a long time. Then he wrote a third column. He wrote at the top of it, what I want for them. He wrote Amara. Medical school. He had known since Amara was 4 years old. She had that mind, the one that noticed things other children did not notice, that asked questions about how bodies worked and why people got sick, and what doctors actually did when they went inside you to fix something. She had taken apart a clock at 6 to understand the mechanism and reassembled it correctly, which Joseph had watched from the doorway with the specific quiet pride of a man who recognizes in his child the thing he values most in the world, genuine curiosity about how things work. She had said once, at age 7, during a dinner table conversation about what they wanted to do when they grew up, I want to be the person who figures out what's wrong. She had not said doctor. She had said the person who figures out what's wrong. Joseph had looked at Ellie across the table, and Ellie had looked at him, and nothing was said, but something was understood. Medical school cost money that Joseph's engineering salary, even whole and uninterrupted, was going to struggle to fully cover. Medical school cost money that a man whose engineering salary had just been eliminated was going to need to be extremely creative to find. He wrote it down anyway. He went looking for work. He found a position as a facilities engineer at a hospital, less than his previous salary but work. He took it. He also took 2 weeks later a second job driving for a private car service on evenings and weekends. The car service had a contract with the hospital where Ellie worked, which meant that sometimes, on the nights when Ellie worked late, Joseph picked her up in the car he was driving for someone else. They had laughed about that, the first time. After that, it was just part of how things worked. The third job came 8 months later. A friend at church who ran a small property management company needed someone reliable to handle maintenance calls, nights and some weekends, on call, mostly small repairs. Joseph said yes. He was already a mechanical engineer. The work was not complicated. The money was not large, but it was consistent, and it added to the other 2, and the 3 together made the column 2 numbers possible, and kept column 3, Amara, medical school, from disappearing into the category of things people want for their children but cannot make real. He did this for 14 years. He was not dramatic about it. He was not a martyr. He did not sit Amara down and explain what he was sacrificing and why. He did not use his exhaustion as a lesson or his overtime as evidence of love that needed to be acknowledged. He simply worked. 3 jobs, 14 years, and he managed it the way his mother had managed her market stall and his father had managed his classroom, with the quiet, sustained competence of a person who has decided that the work is the work and complaining about it is beside the point. Amara knew. Children always know, in the way that children know things, not in the complete adult way, not with the full understanding of what it costs, but in the body, in the texture of ordinary days. She knew that her father left before she was awake most mornings. She knew that the sound of his key in the door at night was later than other fathers' keys. She knew that on the weekends when her friends' fathers were at games and picnics, her father was sometimes at the car service, and sometimes at the management company, and sometimes, on the rare full day off, asleep in the chair in the living room, with the kind of sleep that does not come from being tired, but from being depleted. She studied. She did not do this as a transaction, she was not aware, at 10 or 12 or 14 of calculating a debt. She studied because she was genuinely driven, because the mind Joseph had recognized at 4 years old had continued to grow into something formidable, because she wanted to know things, and the wanting to know things was its own engine. But somewhere underneath the genuine drive was the awareness, absorbed rather than taught, that people were arranging things to make this possible, and that the least she could do was not waste it. She graduated high school with a GPA that put her in the top 3% of her class. She got into an excellent undergraduate program on a partial scholarship. She worked part-time herself through college, which Joseph had told her she did not need to do, and which she had done anyway because she was her father's daughter, and she had inherited, along with his engineer's mind, his specific and practical understanding of how columns worked. She got into medical school on her first application. Joseph had been at work when the email came, the facilities job a Tuesday morning, checking a ventilation system in a building he had checked 100 times. He had gotten the news from Ellie by text. She got in. He had read it standing in a hallway with a toolbox in his hand. He had stood there for a moment. He had texted back, "Good." Ellie had called 20 seconds later. He answered. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew she would." Ellie could hear, in those 4 words, everything he was not saying. She let it be. She said, "Come home for dinner." He came home for dinner. He hugged Amara. He said he was proud of her. He meant it with every layer of himself. He ate dinner, and he asked about the details of the acceptance, and he listened to everything, and he went to bed at 9:30 because he had an early shift. He did not stop working 3 jobs until Amara finished her residency. 14 years. He was 51 when it started. He was 58 when it ended, older, slower, with a back that knew more about 14 years of maintenance work than backs were designed to know, and with the particular knowledge, which he had been carrying quietly for so long it had become part of him, that his daughter was Dr. Amara Osei. He had attended her graduation. He had sat in the auditorium in the suit he had bought 20 years ago and altered twice to account for the changes that decades of hard work make in a body. When they called her name, he had stood up. He had not planned to. He just stood up. Because sitting did not feel right. Because some moments require a person to be vertical. He had not cried. He had not cried because there was nobody to hand the practical things to if he started, because for 14 years the practical things had been his to hand and he had never once set them down, and the habit was too deep to break in an auditorium at a graduation ceremony. He would cry later. On a television stage. In front of 200 people. Without apology. But that comes next. The Family Feud appearance had been Amara's idea, born from a Sunday dinner conversation 3 months after her graduation, when she had been describing the show to her brother Kofi, and her mother and her father had been sitting at the kitchen table listening with the particular listening quality he had, entirely present, saying nothing, taking everything in. And Amara had looked at him across the table and thought, I want to do something for him. I want to do something that is specifically for him, in front of people, that he cannot redirect or minimize or fold into the practical column. She had put in the application that night. The Osei family team was Amara, her mother Ellie, her brother Kofi, her aunt Patricia, Ellie's older sister who had been a pediatric nurse for 30 years, and who had the specific competence in a crisis of someone who had spent her career in situations where competence was not optional, and Amara's closest friend from medical school, a woman named Simone who had sat next to her in gross anatomy in their first year and had never left her side since. Joseph was not on the team. Joseph was in the audience. This had been Amara's specific, deliberate choice. She had told him that the team was full, 5 people, the show's maximum, and that she needed him in the audience so he could see everything clearly, see her, see the family together, see what 14 years had produced. She had said this in a way that was entirely true but also strategically incomplete. Because she had arranged with the production team for something that Joseph did not know was coming. Joseph had accepted this without argument. He dressed carefully for the taping. The good suit, the one from Amara's graduation, altered now a 3rd time because the second alteration had been 4 years ago. He sat in the audience and he waited. When the Osei family walked out onto the stage and Steve Harvey read Amara's name card, Dr. Amara Osei, and the audience applauded, Joseph Osei sat in the 3rd row and watched his daughter stand at the podium of a national television show, and he felt, in his chest, the specific thing that had no adequate name. Not pride exactly, though it was pride. Something larger than pride. Something that included the engineering position eliminated in 2003, and the 3 jobs in the 14 years and the key in the door at night, and the text that said good and the suit altered 3 times. Something that included all of it, and held it quietly. He sat with his hands in his lap, and he watched. Amara was extraordinary on that stage. She had, and this was something that Simone would later say was the most Amara thing about the whole day, prepared, not casually, not in the passing way of someone who has watched the show and figures they know enough. She had researched. She had run the family through practice sessions at the kitchen table. She had printed out the most statistically common survey answers to the most common Family Feud question categories, and she had made her team study them with the same organized thoroughness she brought to board exams and clinical rotations and every other thing she had decided to do correctly. Kofi had complained that this was excessive. Amara had said, "Dad worked 3 jobs for 14 years. We are not coming here to lose." Nobody complained after that. Steve Harvey had greeted them with his customary warmth and had read Amara's name card with a slight pause, the pause of a man who notices things and files them away, and then asked her, with the easy conversational instinct of a man who had been reading rooms for 30 years, "Dr. Osei, what kind of doctor?" "Pediatrics," Amara said. "Children," Steve Harvey smiled the real smile. "Of course," he said. "Of course you went into children." He looked at the audience. "Why are we not surprised?" "Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Amara Osei, pediatrician," the audience applauded. Amara smiled. Ellie, beside her, was already trying not to cry and they had not played a single round. In the 3rd row, Joseph Osei sat with his hands in his lap and watched his daughter acknowledge the applause with the composed, warm confidence of a woman who had earned the right to stand anywhere without apology. He did not cry. Not yet. They played 3 rounds. Aunt Patricia was, as expected, exceptional. 30 years of pediatric nursing had given her a quality similar to Grace Watkins's elementary school teaching. An unusually precise understanding of what ordinary people said about ordinary things. Because 30 years of talking to parents and children in high-stress situations had required her to think constantly about how people communicated and what they actually meant by what they said. She gave 2 number 1 answers in the first round without apparent effort, and accepted the board's confirmation with the quiet nod of a woman for whom being right is the expected outcome. Simone was quick and funny, and had the particular fearlessness of someone who had spent 4 years of medical school and 3 years of residency in situations that were genuinely high stakes, which meant that a game show, however bright the lights, was not going to rattle her. She hit the buzzer with authority and answered with authority, and when she got a wrong answer, she simply said wrong answer before the buzzer confirmed it, which made Steve Harvey stop and look at her. "You called your own strike," he said. "I knew it was wrong when I said it," Simone said. "I just had to see." Steve Harvey looked at the audience. "Doctors," he said, in a tone that was half admiration and half something he was working out in real time. Ellie played with the focused determination of a woman who had spent 25 years managing a hospital and understood that the difference between a good outcome and a bad outcome was almost always preparation. She had done the preparation. She got what preparation produces. Kofi was the family's secret weapon. He was 24 years old and had grown up watching his father work and his sister study, and had absorbed, from that proximity, a specific understanding of what actually mattered in a given situation. He had also, separately, watched an enormous amount of Family Feud over the years, which turned out to be useful in a different way. He knew the rhythms. He knew when to push and when to hold, and he hit the face-off buzzer in the third round a full half-second before anyone else on either side, which was the kind of gap that wins games. Amara played the way she did everything, with preparation, with attention, with the complete absence of wasted motion. She answered when she knew. She held when she wasn't certain. She organized her team around the podium with a quiet authority that came from 3 years of clinical rotations in which organizing a team around a situation was the thing that kept people alive. They won the main game by 11 points. The audience applauded. The family embraced. Simone grabbed Amara's arm and said something in her ear that made Amara laugh with her whole face. Ellie hugged Kofi. Aunt Patricia accepted congratulations with the gracious composure of someone who considered this a reasonable outcome. Steve Harvey came to them and celebrated with them, and then, in the easy transition he was skilled at, said, "Before we get to fast money, I want to take a moment." He looked at Amara. "Dr. Osei," he said. "Your family told us something before the taping today." Amara went still. "They told us about your father." In the third row, Joseph Osei looked up. "They told us," Steve Harvey said, "that your father worked 3 jobs for 14 years so that you could become a doctor." The studio went quiet. Amara's face did something she could not control. Her jaw tightened, her eyes went bright. She was a physician. She had trained for years to manage her expressions in high-stakes situations, to be the calm presence in the room when everything was not calm. But this was not a clinical situation, and there was no training for it, and her face was doing what faces do when something true arrives without warning. 3 jobs, Steve Harvey said. He looked at the audience. For 14 years. This man, Dr. Osei's father, has been in this audience today watching his daughter. He has been sitting in this audience quietly. He looked at Amara. "I think it's time your father stopped sitting." He raised his voice toward the audience. "Mr. Joseph Osei, would you please come down here?" And Joseph Osei, in the third row, in his 3 times altered suit, stood up. Joseph Osei moved through the row slowly, excusing himself past the seated audience members, and walked down the aisle toward the stage with the particular gait of a man who had spent 14 years moving through the world with purpose, not hurrying, not performing anything, simply going where he needed to go because he needed to go there. He was 58 years old. He was not a tall man, 5'10", slightly below the height he had been in his 30s, the way men settle into themselves over decades of hard work. He had gray at his temples now, a full scattering of it that had arrived somewhere in the middle of the 14 years, and that Amara had never commented on, and Ellie had told. Him looked distinguished, and that Joseph had observed in the mirror once, and then not thought about again because he had been too busy for. Sustained vanity. He climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Amara was standing at the podium, and she was not crying, and she was doing everything in her power not to cry. Because she was a physician, and physicians were calm and organized, and she had prepared for this taping, and she was going to be calm and organized through it. She looked at her father walking toward her, and she stopped being a physician for a moment and became something simpler. A daughter, 27 years old, who had watched this man leave before she woke up and come home after she was in bed and sit asleep in the living room chair on his days off. Who had grown up in the specific warmth of someone working that hard on your behalf, without making you feel the weight of it, without using it, without ever once setting it in front of you and asking to be thanked. Joseph walked to her. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her with the expression that fathers have when they are looking at something they are not sure is real, something they worked toward for so long that the actual arrival of it still has the quality of the imagined version, still seems like it might dissolve if examined too closely. He said, "Amara." She said, "Dad." And then she held out her hand, not for an embrace, not yet, but palm up, the gesture of someone offering something. He looked at it. He looked at what was in it. It was her medical school graduation pin. The small gold pin with the caduceus that physicians received at graduation, the one she had put on that morning before the taping and then, in the car on the way to the studio, quietly taken off and held in her hand for the entire drive. "I want you to have this," she said. "I've been thinking about who should have this since graduation. It took me a while to understand." She paused. Her voice was entirely steady. "You made this. I did the studying and the work and the rotations, and that was mine to do. But you made the conditions. You made the space. You worked 3 jobs for 14 years so the conditions existed." She paused again. "This belongs to both of us, but I want you to keep it. Because 14 years of 3 jobs it should be somewhere you can see it. It should be somewhere real." Joseph Osei looked at the pin in his daughter's hand. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he took it. He closed his hand around it, and Joseph Osei, who had not cried in 14 years because he had been too busy working, cried, not loudly, not dramatically. The specific, private, entirely unperformed way of a man who has been holding something for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. His shoulders dropped slightly. His chin dropped. He stood in the middle of a television stage in front of 200 people, and he cried the way people cry when the thing they have been working toward finally arrives, and they can finally, at last, believe it is real. Amara put her arms around her father. He held on. The studio audience was on its feet. Not all at once, in the slow wave that genuine emotion produces. Starting at the front and moving back, people rising because they needed to be standing for this, because sitting was not adequate. There were people in that audience who were crying freely, who had not expected to cry at a game show taping, who were crying anyway because Joseph Osei's shoulders dropping was one of the most human things they had ever seen, because that was what it looked like. Really, specifically looked like when a man who had been carrying something impossibly heavy was finally allowed to put it down. Steve Harvey stood off to the side. He was not performing anything. His eyes were full and he made no effort to manage that. He watched Joseph hold his daughter and he stood with it the way he had learned. Across 15 years of this show and 59 years of living, to stand with moments that were larger than anything a host could usefully contribute to. He let it be. When Joseph and Amara finally separated, Joseph was still holding the pin. He looked at it in his open palm. He looked at his daughter. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," Amara said. "I wanted to. You earned this." "We earned it," she said. Simply, without drama. As a statement of fact that she had arrived at and was not going to negotiate. Joseph looked at her. He had that expression again, the one that could not decide if what it was looking at was real. He nodded once, slowly. He put the pin in his breast pocket. Steve Harvey walked forward then. He stood in front of Joseph and looked at this man, 58 years old, gray at the temples, the 3 times altered suit, the quiet dignity of someone who had spent 14 years doing what he had decided to do and had not asked to be seen for it, and Steve Harvey said, with complete simplicity, "Sir, I need to say something to you." Joseph looked at him. "You worked 3 jobs for 14 years, Steve Harvey said. Not because someone made you, not because you had no choice, because you decided your daughter was going to be a doctor and you went and did what that required." He paused. "Without complaining, without using it, without making her feel like she owed you." He stopped. He was working to keep his voice level and mostly succeeding. "A lot of people say they would do that. You actually did it." He paused again. "I want to say thank you, from everyone in this room, from everyone who is going to watch this. Thank you for showing us what that looks like." Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't do anything remarkable. I just did what fathers do." Steve Harvey shook his head. "No, sir," he said. "You did what fathers should do. That's not the same thing." The audience applauded with the specific force of people who know the difference between those 2 sentences and feel the weight of it. Joseph accepted this. He did not expand on it or argue with it. He simply stood there and accepted it the way he had accepted everything for 14 years, with the quiet, solid presence of a man who understood what work was and had done it and was at peace with having done it. Amara stood beside her father. She was not trying anymore to be a physician. She was just his daughter. She reached over and took his hand, and he let her take it, the specific familiar grip of a parent and child who had been holding hands at crossings since she was 3 years old and were holding hands still. Because some things do not stop being true just because the child has grown. Steve Harvey looked at them both. He looked at the audience. He looked at the camera. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a man who worked 3 jobs for 14 years. He is standing here today on a game show stage because his daughter wanted to give something back, and this was the best way she could think of to do it publicly, in front of people, in a way he could not minimize or redirect." He looked at Joseph. "How'd she do, sir?" Joseph looked at Amara, the expression again, the one that could not fully believe. "She did good," he said. The audience laughed and applauded, and someone in the back row was crying so loudly they did not try to be quiet about it, and nobody minded. Amara laughed. A real, full, completely unguarded laugh that had her father's laugh in it. The one she had grown up hearing in the living room and the kitchen and the car on the rare evenings when he was home and not too tired, and she shook her head and said, 3 jobs for 14 years and all I get is she did good." Joseph smiled. "You did very good," he said. "Thank you, Dad. You're welcome, Amara." 2 sentences. The whole 14 years. The whole distance from the kitchen table in 2003, where he had written column 3, to the stage in 2024, where column 3 was standing next to him in a blazer with her medical graduation pin in his breast pocket. "She did good." "You're welcome." That was the whole thing. They played the fast money round. Amara and Aunt Patricia played together, the pediatrician and the pediatric nurse, which Steve Harvey pointed out was either the most logical combination possible or the least fair to the other family. And the audience laughed, and Aunt Patricia allowed herself a small smile of acknowledgement. They were efficient and thorough, and they did not waste answers. Aunt Patricia scored 94 points in her round, which was exceptional, and Amara scored 108, which was nearly unheard of, and the combined 202 points cleared the $20,000 threshold with room to spare. The audience applauded. The family celebrated in their way, organized, warm, without excess. Joseph stood at the edge of the stage where he had remained since being brought down, and he accepted Amara's hug, and Ellie's hug, and Kofi's hug, and Simone's very enthusiastic hug, and he stood in the middle of all of it with the pin in his breast pocket and the expression of a man who was still working on understanding that this was real. After the taping, the production team gave the Osei family the studio for 30 minutes. Just the family, a few staff members, and Steve Harvey, who had asked to stay. He sat with Joseph at the edge of the stage while the family moved around them and talked. He asked Joseph about the engineering work. He asked about the car service and the property management and the hospital facilities job. He asked what 3 jobs in a day actually looked like, the logistics of it, the schedule. How a man organized 14 years of that without losing the thread. Joseph told him. He told it the way he told things, practically, specifically, without sentiment. He described the schedule, the morning start time and the evening end time, and the days when all 3 overlapped, and the planning required to make all 3 possible without dropping any of them. He described the car service work the way a mechanical engineer describes a system, inputs, outputs, optimization, the places where inefficiency crept in and how he addressed it. Steve Harvey listened to all of this. When Joseph finished, Steve Harvey was quiet for a moment. You optimized 3 jobs the way you'd optimize an engineering system, he said. Joseph considered this. Yes, he said. I suppose I did. What was the hardest part? Joseph thought about it. He did not answer quickly. He gave the question the weight it deserved. The mornings, he said finally. In the beginning, when Amara was still in school, middle school, high school, I left before she was awake. I would walk past her room in the dark. He paused. I wanted to be there when she woke up. I wanted to be at the table for breakfast. He paused again. But I could not be at breakfast and also be at the job, so I chose the job. He looked at his hands. I chose it because the job was the reason she could be at breakfast eventually in a place I could not take her. I chose it because of where it led. He paused one last time. But the mornings were hard. Steve Harvey sat with that for a moment. Did she know? He asked. Did she know how hard it was? Joseph looked across the studio to where Amara was talking with Simone and Kofi. He watched her for a moment. She knew I worked hard, he said. I think children always know that. But I don't think she knew the mornings. He paused. I didn't want her to carry that. I wanted her to carry the studying. The work was mine. The studying was hers. Those were separate columns. Steve Harvey looked at him. Separate columns, he said quietly. Yes, that's how you thought about it. Columns. I'm an engineer, Joseph said. That's how I think about things. Steve Harvey shook his head slowly. He had the expression he got when something landed simply and completely. Sir, he said, you are something. Joseph looked at him with the mild surprise of a man who has not spent much time thinking about what he was. I'm a father, he said. When the episode aired 8 weeks later, it moved through the world with the specific momentum of stories that carry something real. The clip of Amara holding out the graduation pin and Joseph closing his hand around it was the moment that spread fastest. Not because it was the most dramatic moment in the episode, but because it was the most precise. It said one specific, complete thing. This is what gratitude looks like when it is not performance. This is what it looks like when someone looks at what another person gave them and understands the full measure of it. A man in Atlanta named Marcus watched the episode with his teenage son on a Sunday evening. His son was 15 and had recently told him he wanted to be an engineer. Marcus had 3 jobs himself, had been working 3 jobs for 6 years, though not 14 and not yet with a specific column in mind, just because the math of his family's life required it. He watched Joseph Osei stand on that stage and describe the mornings, the walking past his daughter's room in the dark, the choosing the job because of where it led, and he sat with his son on the couch and he was quiet for a while. Then he said, I walk past your room in the mornings too. His son looked at him. I want you to know that, Marcus said. I want you to know I'm there. even when you can't see me. His son was 15 years old and not yet in the habit of expressing what he felt in words. He sat on the couch for a moment. Then he said, "I know, Dad." Marcus nodded. He looked at the television. "Engineer," he said. "Good choice." A woman in Houston named Carol, who had worked 2 jobs for 11 years to put her son through nursing school, and whose son had graduated the previous spring, watched the episode 3 times. After the 3rd viewing, she called her son. He answered immediately. He always answered immediately, which was one of the things she noticed about him that she thought about sometimes late at night. She said, "I watched something today. I want to tell you about a man named Joseph." She told him the whole story. Her son listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, do you want to come visit this weekend?" She came on Saturday. He cooked. Joseph Osei continued to work. One job now, the hospital facilities position, which had grown across the years into a senior management role that paid what the 3 jobs together had paid before. Because systems reward people who understand them, and Joseph understood this one completely. He worked his regular hours, and he came home at a reasonable time, and he sat at the dinner table with Ellie, and sometimes when Amara was not on call, with Amara too. He had the graduation pin on his dresser. He had put it in a small wooden box, the kind of box that held things that required a container that were too important for a drawer. He looked at it in the mornings before work. He had the box made by a woodworker he knew. He had requested one specific thing, that the lid fit with the particular snug precision of well-made things. The way the lid of a well-made box meets its base with no gap and no excess, just contact, clean, complete, correct, the woodworker had delivered exactly that. Joseph opened the box every morning. He looked at the pin. He closed the box. He went to work. Not 3 jobs now, just 1. But the habit of the morning ritual stayed. Because some habits are not about the necessity that created them, but about what they have become. The pin was a reminder not of what had been hard, but of what the hard thing had produced. It was the output of the system. It was column 3, made solid, made small, made holdable. He could hold it in one hand. 14 years had fit into one small gold pin and a wooden box, and one daughter who was somewhere in a hospital right now, a children's hospital. Because of course it was a children's hospital. Because she had said at 7 years old that she wanted to be the person who figured out what was wrong, and she had meant it. And who was doing what she had said she would do, doing it completely. Doing it the way her father had taught her to do things without ever quite saying, "Do them this way." You do not say it. You show it. Every morning, before the sun is up, before your daughter is awake, you pick up the toolbox and you go. She sees the light on when she gets home. She knows.